How is it that something as heavy as a massive cruise boat can actually float on water? And what does the answer to that question have to do with convection anyway? Keep watching the video and you will find out. At the simplest level, convection happens when hot air above a heat source, so let's say this is a room and we have a fire here, the hot air above the heat source rises and makes its way upwards. Now, as it gets higher, what it does is it cools down and the cooler air falls down to take its place. So we've got the hot air rising over here, we've got the cooler air falling down to take its place, and this movement of air here is called a convection current. Now this can happen in a gas like air, it can also happen in a liquid. It couldn't happen in a solid because the particles are bonded together and are not free to move. So why does convection happen? Well, to understand convection, the first thing we need to do is go back to the idea of density. Now, density is something that you will have studied lower down in the school probably. Density is the mass of something divided by its volume. So we get the mass of it, sometimes measured in grams or kilograms. We can get the volume measured in meters cubed or maybe centimeters cubed, and the density of a substance is measured in grams per centimeters cubed. Now, when you understand about the density of objects, one of the important rules is that an object that has a low density will rise if it's placed in a fluid that's got a high density. Now, fluids here can refer to liquids or gases. Let's think of that cruise boat example. The cruise boat is extremely heavy. However, its density, its mass divided by volume, the number we get here, is actually less than that of water. If we get the water's mass divided by the water's volume, we get a larger number. The cruise boat's density is less, therefore it floats on the surface. Let's imagine we've got a gas here, or maybe even a liquid. Here are the particles. Now, the particles are moving about randomly, but let's imagine now that we heat this up, we heat this gas up, we heat this liquid up. The particles are vibrating, but now they're vibrating more and more rapidly. As they vibrate more and more rapidly, the space between the particles increases. So we're left with something like this. Now, I've exaggerated it here, but you can see that as the particles were vibrating so much, they've pushed each other apart. So it's interesting to note that the volume of the substance here was small, the particles have vibrated and pushed each other apart, so now the volume is large. So the volume has increased, but there has been no change in mass. There's still the same number of molecules here as there are over here. So look what's happened at the equation. The mass has stayed the same because the number of atoms or molecules hasn't changed, yet the volume has increased. So something was heated, its volume is increased. Well, if the volume has increased, but the mass hasn't changed, what would have happened to the density? So we've got the mass, we're now dividing it by a larger number. That means the density has decreased. So when something is heated, its density decreases. Look at this example. Here we have something like a balloon, say. In the balloon we've got some warm air. Now, because it's warm, the particles have moved further apart from each other, so it's less dense. We can see the particles are quite spaced apart. It's surrounded by cooler air. The cooler air is denser. The particles are not vibrating, not moving about as quickly, so they've not pushed each other apart. So it's cooler air and it's more dense. Because we've got the warmer, less dense air here, it's in the presence of the cool air, it will rise. It will try and get above the cool air. This is how a hot air balloon works. We've got the warm, less dense air here, and it tries to rise because it's surrounded by cooler, more dense air. And that is basically convection. To summarize convection then, density of any substance is its mass divided by its volume. When something is heated, its volume increases, it expands, which means the density decreases. We've got a larger volume here, which means a smaller density. Once this density has decreased, if it is a liquid or a gas, it will rise, and that is what we call convection. Convection can't happen in a solid because the particles are bonded together, so there's no way they can move, there's no way they can rise. Don't forget there are many other videos on all sorts of other topics in GCSE physics, so if you've liked this video, please do consider subscribing to Physics with Mr. Drew.